Hello everyone, hope you're well, hope you're doing good. Welcome to the Good Talk, back in with you guys for another show, a raw reaction show, usually the show in which we react to the latest Arsenal news, matches and a whole host more stuff as well. I hope you've been enjoying the content. Obviously we've been putting out some regular stuff, two shows for you guys yesterday. One on George Lewis, if you don't know much about him, I got basically some info from a Norwegian football manager researcher. So if you want to find out a little bit more on the Norwegian Rwandan winger, please do go check out that video a tactical breakdown on Philippe Coutinho to Arsenal as well. So please do go check out those videos on the channel. They're still there. But today, the raw reaction is slightly different because it technically is a raw reaction of sorts because I'm reacting to something. In fact, I'm reacting to Terry's The Football Terrace, which you haven't gone and check out. It's a really, really good channel. Go check it out. Lots of controversial stuff. I was on there this week with some of the Arsenal boys and Adam talking about a lot of Arsenal related stuff. So please do go and check it out. I'll leave a link. If you're watching on playback, you'll be able to click it. If you're watching live, you won't be able to because it's not there yet. But I'll leave a link in the description to the show that I'm reacting to, where basically Terry was on with Adam and with this woman called Anita, and they were discussing. It was an opportunity for Anita, who I don't know of her. I've never come into contact with her on social media or whatever. And Anita basically wanted to put across the opinion that Arsenal's Invincibles are overrated. Now, that was the title of the show. I felt that the show sort of bled in actually to a debate about who is the best Premier League team, and I'll come on to that in a second. The differences between those two arguments, because I think there is a lot of difference between those two arguments. And thirdly, chat box. I know you're there. Thank you ever so much for tuning in, Tiger Tom, Tiger T. I mean, you might be called Tom, you might not. I've just made a complete assumption there. Mr. J, one of our members, and some other of you guys, thank you ever so much for tuning in. I'm very well. I'm going to try and talk through sort of my side of things in terms of the reaction to this. And then if you've got some comments of your own as we go through it, please make sure you throw those in the chat, because I will be coming to the chat box a little bit later on to get some reactions and thoughts to what you guys think. But let's go straight into it. The reason why I wanted to put out the video, because it really sort of got to me in a way. Watching the video, I was getting frustrated. I texted Adam this morning saying that I felt really bad for him, because Adam was basically on there and being bombarded with the opposite side of the opinion, firstly from Anita, and then they got a couple more people on who also battered Adam about it. And I felt so sorry for the lad who had to try and defend the Invincibles practically on his own until towards the end of the video. And I want to talk through some of the points. I've kind of broken this down into three sections about how I want to sort of talk about. The first thing is to talk through some certain aspects of what was said and sort of the defense of the Invincibles. Now, starting off, let's discuss the term overrated, because when we describe things as being overrated, effectively what you're saying is it's not as good as what people say it is. Like, let's not even put any examples, because if I put any example in there, people will go crazy, because saying something is overrated creates a level of controversy, because a lot of people would say that this is an amazing thing. Now, I felt that the video started, as I've already mentioned, to bleed into saying that a lot of Arsenal fans would say that the Invincible side is the best Premier League side, full stop. Anita put across the point of view that she doesn't feel that that side gets into a top 5 teams that have played in the Premier League. And by the way, everyone is allowed to this opinion. I just think that the way that it was delivered and some of the points that came across just were so insubstantial and didn't really feel like they held too much truth. And the next thing is that I got incredibly frustrated about the context of the video, because why does everything need to be bashed? I remember replying to the tweet when it was announced saying that Arsenal's Invincibles get bashed so often and criticised so much. I don't understand how they could ever be overrated, because so many people like to criticise it and try and take the gloss off what is an amazing achievement. But it happened, and that's fine. If you want to criticise things, it's down to your opinion. I just feel like, what is the point in trying to take the gloss off a wonderful achievement? Some of the other teams that were brought up in the video were the likes of the United treble-winning team, Leicester's fantastic Premier League victory, and we're going to break some of these comparisons down as to why I feel maybe they're or how they compare to the Invincible side, shall we say, and the reasons why I feel that the Invincible side is way up there with these teams, the Centurions, etc. But I want to talk through some of the things that were mentioned in the show. And so I watched it back and a couple of times, just sort of familiarise myself. It's not going to be just a pure vent and a reaction to this. One of the reasons that Anita brought up was that Argentina has great players when Adam started bringing up about the team, but they're not the greatest. Now, it's a little bit of a substance-less argument to say that just because a team has great players doesn't mean that it was one of the greatest. And she used the example of having Lionel Messi in that Argentina team, and they've never won a World Cup. Well, the difference there is that Arsenal did win something. They won the Premier League season with no losses whatsoever. So to use an argument that just because a team has great players doesn't mean it's a great team or it's not one of the best, it doesn't really fit. That doesn't really work, because unfortunately that team for their side is that they did win. They did win a Premier League title and they went unbeaten. So to use that, no, doesn't really sit well. She said, big up for the 12 draws, which puts you on par with Leicester. One of the biggest criticisms of the Invincible season was that there was too many draws and that a lot of the games weren't great, even though Arsenal are often hugely praised for the fantastic football that was being played. The fact that they drew 12 games during the season. In fact, if you watch the Invincibles documentary, which is fantastic, and you should, Jens Lehmann talks about how he thinks 12 draws is too many. But the difference is that 12 draws compared to, say, 32, 33, 34, 35 wins and one loss, it's incomparable, because that one loss makes that season so much. It takes the gloss off of seasons so much. To say that you can go through an entire league without losing a single game, and yet you can say another team won more games or acquired more points during that season. Teams can go ahead and try and beat that every single season. But as soon as they lose just one game, just one, throughout a 38-game season, that's gone. So drawing games is one of the biggest reasons why Arsenal have that record. And actually, if you look at some of the games like towards the end of the season where we'd already claimed the title, with several games still left to go in the season, that period where you've got the mentality of, well, we've won it now, we can afford to lose any of these games, and we've still won the title. And there was a game away at Portsmouth in which I believe it might have been Yakubu that scored for Portsmouth and we went 1-0 up. And eventually it took a sort of late goal from Jose Antonio Reyes, God rest his soul, to equalise it up for the Arsenal. And those types of games, I think there was a Birmingham game that was absolutely drab and it just had no substance to it. Those types of games make these seasons. Those types of games are the reason why they're so successful. You look at some of the seasons that other great teams have had, and there will be poor performances. And those poor performances ultimately led to that team losing in those games. And the difference between that Arsenal side is that they had the resolute nature and the determination not to lose a single game. And so to criticise the 12 draws it kind of backfires as an argument, because the 12 draws signifies games in which they could have lost, but they had the desire and the determination not to lose those games, and they came through them and ultimately earned a point and ended up not losing a single game. The other argument was, apart from going the season unbeaten, what did you actually do? Obviously, that statement in itself tries to discredit the amazing achievement by taking away and saying that. And actually links, there's another guy on there called Neek, who, again, I've not come across before. And he said Arsenal only won the Premier League, an achievement that every other Premier League winner has done. That seems a very biased statement, doesn't it? If you're a supporter of a team that hasn't done it and yet has won the Premier League, yes, I can see why you would use that as an argument. It's the same thing. You've won a league. You haven't gained anything extra, except we did. And we did it to a point where, and I know that the Gold Trophy gets a lot of criticism for a lot of other fans, but the fact is that it's a trophy that was given to Arsenal by the league to commemorate the achievement. Were Manchester City given anything specific for winning 100 games? Was the Chelsea season that was the year after in 04-05 given anything for that? Was Liverpool's, well, they didn't even win the league? Was Leicester's? No, they weren't giving anything extra because they're not seen as the same level of achievement as Arsenal's Invincibles. So to talk about, did we win anything else? No, because that's not the point of an unbeaten Premier League season. When Claude came on and talked about how Arsenal should have done a lot better, I can't agree more with that. Arsenal during that season were amazing. And ultimately, the desire and the output in the Premier League probably cost them in the cup competitions that year. And it's so frustrating, as Claude mentioned, that Porto were the team that won the Champions League, because Porto arguably could have been beaten, even though it was an exceptionally good. And if you haven't gone and listened to, there's a fantastic podcast on Graham Hunter's The Big Interview where they talk to, was he a Jamaican striker? Played for Porto. I think he played for Blackburn for a bit. Can't remember, was it Roberts? No, it wasn't. It's someone else. Someone in the chat box will probably remind me. But was it Benny McCarthy? I think it might have been Benny McCarthy. Porto striker, fantastic interview talking about that Porto Champions League win. If you've not listened to it, please go and listen to it. But still, even though with that great Porto side, I felt that Arsenal would have had enough to beat them. And the fact that we beat Chelsea 3 times in that same season and yet lost to them in the Champions League ultimately is so gutting, absolutely gutting. Let's move on to the next one. It was just another point about Arsenal not winning any trophies during that season besides the league. But ultimately, that was, thank you, Spikey. Yes, it was Benny McCarthy. I knew I was right. I knew I'd get it eventually. It wasn't Jamaican. He was South African, wasn't he? He was South African. When you're talking about like this league season, the other points that were brought up when Claude came on later in the video, and he said that he reckons that the 98 team, the 2002 team, the 91 side were better teams overall, and that the 89 achievement was a greater achievement. And I completely get the argument of the 89, because if you look at what Liverpool were doing in that time, to win the league after not winning it for so long, to come out of absolutely nowhere and take that title at Anfield is obviously an amazing achievement. But it's no different to what lots of other teams have done during that season. It's just not. Let's look at some of your comments before I go on a little bit further. Daniel says the difference between Arsenal and these other teams is that Arsenal on their worst possible day still managed to avoid defeat. A great point that I brought up earlier on. That is a key difference. A key difference. Mr. J, one of my members, says, I haven't watched the Football Terrace, but sounds like people were chucking any counter arguments not relating to Arsenal, and the Invincible has no substance. If you want to be ultra critical, you could say that Arsenal drew too many, but who cares? We should have won the Champions League that year, and we went 49 games, not just the 38, of course, and then absolutely robbed in that 50th game, as we always maintain away at Old Trafford. I just feel that the argument on the video bled from Arsenal being Arsenal's Invincibles being overrated into who is the best Premier League team. Now, if you're going to set out to do a video, focus on one or the other. If you want to turn around and say that Arsenal's Invincible side was overrated, which is the point of view that was put across from the start of the video, then stay on that. Don't talk about how other teams or what their achievements were in other seasons. Focus specifically on your criticisms of that Arsenal side to convince me that it was overrated, because there is no possible way in which anyone can come up with an argument to try and diminish the achievement of going an entire league season unbeaten. Now, the difference between that is that the argument sort of moved on to talking about who is the best Premier League side. Now, if you were to ask me player for player, who has the best Premier League side, that's a different question to saying, is the Arsenal Invincible side overrated? Because if you take a look at Arsenal's side that actually went that season unbeaten, and I've written it all down and done my research and all that, talking through it, Jens Lehmann joined at 33 years of age for £1.5 million from Dortmund. Lauren from Mallorca for £10 million. Campbell came from Spurs on a free transfer. Kolo Touré was signed from £150,000 from ASEC Mimosas. Fantastic team name. Ashley Cole was brought through the youth academy. Vieira signed for about £4 million from Milan. Gilberto Silva, £5 million from Atletico Mineiro. Ljungberg, £4 million from Halmstad in Sweden, I believe it was. Bergkamp, £10 million from Inter. Pires, £8 million from Marseille. And Henry, £14 million from Juve. Like, overall, this team cost just under £60 million. And a big criticism is going, well, that's the price that players were going for. The season after that we went invincible, Chelsea spent £90 million that single summer. not on the team that they were using that league season, £90 million just in that season. And net, it was 88, net spend, it was £88 million. They sold a couple of players, mostly on frees, and they sold one guy for about £2 million. So to talk about how Arsenal's team, oh, well, that's the finances of that part and that era of football. No, because the season after, and that's one of the teams actually that Anita brought up, that Chelsea team of next year that got like 95 points, I believe it was. And it was a fantastic season for Chelsea. And I don't want to take anything away from achievements, because that, in my opinion, it's just silly to try and diminish achievements in football. The whole argument was about Arsenal's Invincibles being overrated. Now, to spend £90 million the season after and to not achieve arguably an even greater achievement diminishes that, because I see a team that went unbeaten in a league that cost less than £60 million. You would expect the season after, if a team spent £90 million just in one summer, to go out and probably beat that side, because they would improve on the players that Arsenal had at the time. But the fact is that Arsenal's achievement of going unbeaten is only strengthened in intensity and in accolade by the fact of what was spent and the players that were used. I think they brought up the fact that Leicester's achievement was better than the Invincibles because of who Leicester were. I reckon if you look at the wages of the players and the cost of that team, it would come somewhere similar into how much that team cost to put together and the squad. And the fact that Arsenal's most expensive player, I think, was Jose Antonio Reyes, who played for 6 months of that season, was about 16, rising to £70 million that he cost. The difference in quality for the money and the achievement to put that team together with the finances that are available just goes to show how important that team was. And the thing about the Leicester thing is that a lot, and don't get me wrong, the Leicester winning the season is unbelievable considering the team that they were, and that they were practically on the verge of relegation the season before. Shows the miraculous rise. But also you do need to take a look at the teams that are around them. Arsenal ended up finished second that season. Arsenal beat them twice in that year, and I think they lost another couple of games as well. In fact, I've written down those teams. Leicester lost to Arsenal twice. They lost to Liverpool. I was actually at the Hull Stadium, which escapes my memory of what it's called, but in Hull. I was in Hull because a friend of mine, when I was at university that year, he was a Leicester fan, so they went up and we sat in the away end for that game and lost. Leicester were knocked out that year by Hull in the League Cup, and then they lost to Spurs in the FA Cup after a replay. So again, it's that symbol of going unbeaten, not being recreated. The argument that was put forward by that neat bloke saying that you're winning a Premier League season, it's no different to winning any other Premier League. Well, Leicester, they won the same, and yet you're giving them a greater accolade than what Arsenal is, when all they've done is won the Premier League and they've lost several games. Arsenal go a season unbeaten and it's wanting to be heavily criticised and downgraded. Let's look at a few more of your comments. Thibaut Pesk says, tell me any other player of any other top Premier League side who would be ahead of Bergkamp, Henry, Vieira, Campbell. I'd even have Pires over most wingers present and past. Again, this is now getting into the thing where you start comparing players individually and comparing teams in terms of their quality. Because if you want to turn around and say that the Centurions and that Manchester City side was greater, say, than the Arsenal Invincible side, if you look at what it took to construct that Manchester City team, the millions and the millions that went into it, does that not then make Arsenal's team look better for what they achieved on the budget that was used to create and construct that side? Does that not make it look better? Because I certainly feel that it does. If you go and say that Manchester City's side are the greatest Premier League team as a reason to make Arsenal's Invincibles supposedly overrated, then you need to take into account the amount of millions that were spent on that Manchester City team. The amount of hundreds of millions of pounds on Kyle Walker, on Aguero, on De Bruyne. £1 billion probably has gone into that team quite easily. And yet they can't muster an invincible Premier League season. For me, when you talk about those other sides, you improve the argument for the Arsenal Invincibles team, because that team was arguably, on quality-wise, maybe not as good as the Centurion side, player for player. And yet that side couldn't do it, and that side can't do it. And then we look at this Liverpool side, and some people are saying the Liverpool side of this season are even better than the Manchester City and will arguably get more than the 100 points that Manchester City have acquired this season. Well, in that case, that Liverpool side lost to a Watford side that are incredibly woeful this year. They lost significantly. They were battered by that Watford side. So how can that then be used as a stick to beat the Arsenal Invincibles team? It doesn't make any sense or add up anything for me. Let's look at some more. We've had a super chat from Ariane. Finally, Ariane's revealed himself. Who has been Julian Nagelsmann in the chat? You've been found out, Ariane. Unbelievable. He says, don't worry, Tom. It's just an anti-Arsenal agenda. Absolute nonsense. Thank you ever so much for revealing yourself, Ariane, who was originally Julian Nagelsmann. Here we go. Peace Tembo says the 97-98 01-02 double winning teams are better than the Invincibles. We were lucky against teams like Portsmouth, Bolton and Leicester. Luck comes into every season. First of all, you have to say that no team has ever won a Premier League without getting lucky somewhere. So that, for me, doesn't come into it. Every single team gets lucky somewhere. And the 97-98 and 02-01 double winning teams. Now, individually, you might say those players are better. You might turn around and say that Tony Adams was a greater player than either of the two centre-backs, and I probably agree with you. You might say that Bergkamp was a more accomplished player in 01-02 than, say, he was in 03-04, and I might probably agree with you. You might look at other players like Lee Dixon on the pitch as a better right-back than Lara, and that one's probably a little bit more up in the air. But the fact is that even though those teams were arguably better, I still feel that strengthens the 03-04 argument, because you can say that those teams are better, but they still didn't go a season unbeaten in a very, very similar era of football. And the fact that a team that you're saying was less good and arguably wasn't as good in terms of quality can go a season unbeaten, for me, only strengthens the argument that that team categorically cannot be looked at as being overrated whatsoever. It goes against what overrated would mean, because you're saying that you rate the 97, 98, 01, 02 teams higher, and yet they aren't going seasons unbeaten like the 03-04 team. I hope that point's coming across. I hope it is, and that makes sense. I hope it does. Please let me know in the chat. Jung Bergkamp, fantastic name, says Henry, Vieira and Cole get into the Prem all-time 11. So how are the Invincibles overrated? Another good point. I mean, these players that obviously you can't just simply look at their season that single year. You have to look at it across the whole spectrum of what they achieved. And we're trying to look at this one single season in isolation compared to all the others. But these players are amazing. You can't discredit who or what that team achieved and who those players are. You just can't. Krish says, this Liverpool side got KO'd against Villa, Watford, Chelsea, and you can't count Villa. I know where you're coming from, Krish, but you can't count that Villa side. I can't. It would make no sense, because they just didn't put out their team, did they? And arguably this season, Arsenal put out a better side, and we got knocked out against them with that awful B team that they put out. So come on, let's put a little bit. But the Atletico game was fantastic. If you haven't gone and seen it, it was absolutely brilliant. I loved that game so much in the Champions League this season. The last game that we've ever seen with a crowd in so far this season. Let's scroll up and see any more. Chris says that Chelsea 04-05 bought it all and parked the bus. Now, the thing is, it's a very, very Arsenal point of view, isn't it, when you turn around and you say that Man City and Chelsea bought the league. But if you had that amount of money, you'd go out and you'd spend it. That's what I don't get. There was nothing stopping them. There was no financial fair play. So if a billionaire owner wants to come in and spend a lot of money on that team, there's nothing to stop him from doing that. And yes, we can turn around and criticise it and say that they spent all that money. But you look at the likes of Everton now, spending hundreds of millions of pounds, and they're not winning anything. They're not getting anywhere near the top 4, top 6. So you still have to look about how that money was spent. It was bought on players like Drogba from Marseille, who was a fantastic striker. I hate his guts as an Arsenal fan, but you can't take away the fact that he was an amazing striker and did us over so many times. But the fact is that They might have parked the bus, they might have spent loads, but they achieved a Premier League title, but they didn't achieve it unbeaten, even after spending 1.5 times more in a single summer than that entire Arsenal team was worth. And that's why you can't sit there and say that the Arsenal side was overrated. You just can't. It's as simple as that. We'll probably stick around for a few more comments, 100%. Just to get some more thoughts on this. CJ Jackson says the Invincibles underachieved with that team. They should have won 3 Premier Leagues in a row and the Champions League. Yeah, I mean that 02-03 season is looked upon as such a big miss and such a downturn towards the end of the season. I remember that Mark Viduka goal sort of ending our hopes at the end of it as well. And we should have won 3 Premier Leagues in a row. We should have won the Champions League, and we nearly won it 2 years later as well. But it would have been unreal, really, really unreal to have done that. But I think for me, it highlights even more that in that 02-03 season, where we didn't achieve really too much, that you then go into the following season and can turn what has been such an awful, detrimental mentally effect on the club into an unbeaten Invincible season, just brings in even more accolades for the Arsenal side, for sure. I also want to bring up, so let's look at some of the other sides. So Anita brought up that the other teams that are better was, say, the Man City Centurions. They lost 2-1 to Newcastle during that season. Liverpool's side that obviously finished behind Manchester City lost to Manchester City that season. For me, I find it very funny that Liverpool side was used, the one that came behind Manchester City, that only lost 1 game, I believe, that came behind Manchester City, is used as something to say that the Arsenal Invincible side is overrated. They use a team that didn't even win anything in the Premier League. That's so strange to me, is that they can then use a side that didn't win the Premier League to say that the Arsenal side is overrated. That stuns me. Leicester, obviously, I've already mentioned, lost to us twice, lost to Liverpool, lost to Hull in the League Cup, and Spurs in the FA Cup. Chelsea's side, I've already talked about, £88 million net, and they lost to a very poor Manchester City team that season in 04-05. United's treble winners, which is, for me, the biggest achievement which rivals the Invincible season, is winning the treble, 100%. It's the closest I think you can get to achievement as good as going a season and winning the league unbeaten. They lost to us 3-0. They lost to Sheffield Wednesday 3-1. They lost to Middlesbrough 3-2 in the league that season. They had an awful start to the season. I think they were in 11th a few games in. And they went on to achieve amazing things that year. My point of view, and I probably ended up repeating myself quite a lot this video, but the whole point is that you cannot sit there and turn around and say to me that the Arsenal Invincible side is overrated, because of what that team costs in a region of £60 million to put together. When you look at other sides across leagues that have been spending millions and billions and winning trebles and winning doubles and doing amazing things, that those sides still could not muster a whole league unbeaten. That goes to show how important, how much of achievement going that league is. And you can't sit there and create a whole hour video and use the arguments that were put forth to say that season was overrated or that team was overrated. If you want to turn around and say that the Arsenal Invincible side is the best team to ever play in the Premier League, you would have a fairly strong argument, because it's a simple matter of fact that no other team has ever achieved that. If, like Claude said, that those other sides were better in terms of quality, I might actually tend to agree that in terms of quality, those teams were probably better. And I, ironically, after this, enjoyed, and having not even been alive at the time, but looking back and seeing the achievement of 89, I think that as a moment in football, is probably my favourite as an Arsenal moment. But to say that this Arsenal Invincible team was overrated, you're having an absolute laugh. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I really want to get your thoughts and your comments in the comment section below. Please tune in tomorrow at 3 o'clock for the Tactical Breakdown podcast with myself, Drew, and Jeremy Smith. We're going to talk about the impact that William Saliba is going to have next season, or maybe even this season. Depends how things work out. Probably unlikely. We'll see him this year. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. So please do go and come on and listen to that. Turn those notifications on so you'll know when it drops. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Give the video a like if you've enjoyed it. And even if you haven't, but it has made you think, I hope you drop it a like for that reason. I hope to speak to you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.